Welcome to the StormchaserQ Show. I'm meteorologist Quincy Vagel, and I just got back from an impromptu storm chase. I was not expecting a storm chase today, but things can kind of change out of nowhere, and it was kind of fitting because I was trying to decide on a topic for my next episode, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback from you all, so I appreciate it, but I couldn't decide. I didn't have enough time to really decide because by this afternoon I found myself storm chasing. So just a high-level overview, a summary before I get into the kind of the details of the story. I ended up chasing a rogue supercell in western Oklahoma today that I can't really say was expected, but I'm not totally surprised. But the story begins is that I knew I had a free day today to storm chase if there were storms, but in the morning I was not really excited by anything. There was a potential for a few pulse or brief pop-up storms in central Oklahoma, maybe northern Oklahoma, but nothing super impressive. By about lunchtime, it looked like some storms were beginning to fire north of Oklahoma City, and being only about a half hour north, I decided, well, I need to go to Edmond anyway, which is north of Oklahoma City, to run some errands. Brought my camera with me just in case, but the storms were not very impressive, very low contrast, nothing worth taking a picture of. So I came home, but I was still casually looking at the weather data, the surface maps, radar, and satellite, and noticing that northwestern Oklahoma had a very conditional shot at possibly a few severe storms, marginally severe storms. It looked like on the western fringe of the early day convection, possibly on an outflow boundary, that area would juxtapose with strong heating over northwestern Oklahoma and some low-level vorticity to potentially produce a few storms. I decided that by 3 o'clock I would make a decision on the new data. Still kind of a coin flip. And usually when I'm on the fence, it's really not worth it and I'm grasping at straws, or there's a potential for something and I'm kind of being a little pessimistic. 3 o'clock rolls around, I'm still in my apartment waiting. Then by about 3:30 I decided to just give it a shot. My goal was initially to head to northwestern Oklahoma, where on satellite it looked like some storms were beginning to bubble and potentially form. I left Oklahoma City, got to a position about a little bit northwest of El Reno, and a few storms were developing. They weren't that impressive. I continued on. I went all the way up to far northwestern Oklahoma, and there were a few storms developing kind of in the axis of the best instability and just far enough west to not be negatively impacted by early day convection. There were a few storms just south of the Kansas border that briefly showed some transient supercell structure, some interesting structure, but it was very short-lived. And just to give some background information, the deep layer shear, and that's what you really need for supercells, was not optimal. If anything, it was sub-marginal today. Usually my benchmark is about 30 knots for supercells. We were looking at 20 to maybe 25 knots. So it's no surprise that the storms were only briefly organized. I quickly bailed on those storms, headed back south, and then on my way back home, some more storms were firing in the same areas before, northwest of El Reno, so about halfway between where I was there and then Oklahoma City. I had to drive through the storms to go home anyway, so I continued south, got to Sealing, and there was one storm that was nearly stationary. It looked like it was potentially close to interacting with an outflow boundary. It looked like it was forming into a supercell. So I changed path a little bit and went straight south toward the storm, and by the time I got to the Clinton area, it was a bona fide supercell. This storm was beginning to interact with an outflow boundary. It was getting closer to sunset, so the low-level jet was increasing. So low-level shear was definitely increasing. There was plenty of low-level moisture. Instability was there. The deep layer shear was increasing a bit, but it was still borderline at best, 25 to maybe 30 knots. But when I got to Clinton, I saw some structure that was indicative of a supercell, and then almost out of nowhere, all of a sudden there was this lowering and there was a funnel cloud forming. It only lasted a couple of minutes. It looked like a tornado was trying to form as the storm interacted with an outflow boundary, but in the end that funnel lifted and the storm continued on. But this rotating storm, this supercell, began to drift south, so it was deviating from the outflow boundary, it was deviating away from all that convective debris that was in place over central Oklahoma, which meant this was a storm to chase. So I headed south, got all the way to I-40, had a few photo opportunities, and then it was getting close to sunset, so it was about time to call off the storm chase. But around New Cordell, this well-organized supercell was clearly rotating, had some photogenic structure again, but it was getting dark, so it was kind of hard to get some good pictures. I shot a little bit of video, and it's not the best quality. It's a little bit blurry, it's a little bit dim, but this was a bona fide, a fairly intense supercell that was south of I-40 and it was drifting south-southwest and within an environment that was just barely supportive of a supercell. But that's why I storm chase. Even on these days that look marginal at best, you never know what you might see. Some of my best storm chases have been on days that were marginal or just otherwise didn't look all that impressive. I didn't see any storm chasers out. There wasn't any traffic issues. It was a great chase day that came out of nowhere. And the Storm Prediction Center is great, but I don't always chase based on their outlooks. And if you're not too familiar with the Storm Prediction Center outlooks, they basically range from 1 to 5, with 1 being marginal, meaning the environment is marginally favorable for severe storms, to a 5, which means high risk, which means numerous intense supercells are likely. The outlook today was a 0. It was general thunderstorm. The nearest marginal risk was in northeastern Colorado, so not even close. But like I said, starting the day, I was not all that intrigued anyway by the prospects, but things lined up just right, and that outflow boundary was really what helped the low-level shear. There was plenty of rotation in the mid-levels of the atmosphere with these storms, with storm relative helicity and then that low-level jet increasing. So I'm not totally surprised that it played out the way it did. And again, that's why it's always good to be flexible and be willing to storm chase. And I really didn't have anything to lose. I only had to drive a couple of hours west and drive a couple hours east back home after the storm chase. So that was my day. I don't see any storm chasing in the near future, but who knows? Things could always change. I do appreciate all the submissions you guys have been giving me for questions you want me to answer, topics you want me to cover. You can send me those suggestions on Instagram or Twitter at StormchaserQ. You can email me at stormchaserq@gmail.com or visit my website, go to quincyvagel.com/ask, and you can submit your question or topic there. And I'm getting a lot of great submissions. I have a lot of great ideas, and look for new episodes coming up soon. So until later, talk to you soon.